Welcome back, everyone. So today's explainer is going to require a pretty massive mindset shift. We are looking at the official Swedish traffic theory companion, specifically diving into their priority rules. Now, if you drive, regardless of where you are in the world, you probably think a lot about who has the right of way. Well, we are going to completely deconstruct that concept today. We're going to look at how traffic actually works when you strip away the entitlement and focus on a much safer, incredibly structured system. Let's get right into it.
Let's dive into the core concept underlying literally all Swedish priority regulations, and it goes like this. No one possesses explicit rights in traffic, there are only shared binding obligations. I absolutely love this framework. Think about it. Approaching an intersection with the mindset of I have the right of way actually introduces severe risk. Instead, safe drivers rely on defensive spatial awareness. You should be framing every single encounter on the road as the other vehicle has an obligation to give way to me under these circumstances. It completely changes you from an aggressive driver demanding your turn into a defensive driver anticipating the obligations of others.
All right, Section 1. Traffic Control, Strict Hierarchy. Let's get into the absolute legal foundation here, before we even look at a single intersection.
When you're out on the road, you will inevitably run into situations where multiple rules, signs, or signals all seem to apply at the exact same time. So how do you resolve those conflicts? Well, Sweden uses this strict, top-down legal hierarchy. Step 1. Police signals. If a police officer is directing traffic, their instructions override absolutely everything else. Step 2. Traffic lights. If there's no police officer, you follow the lights. Step 3. Road signs. If the traffic lights are out or blinking yellow, you look to the signs. And finally, Step 4. General traffic rules. You only fall back on the general baseline rules if there are no police, no lights, and no signs dictating your actions. It's really an elegant, foolproof filter.
Moving on to Section 2. Giving way versus stopping. Let's look at the two primary behavioral responses you need to know.
There is a really clear critical contrast here between giving way and stopping. The obligation to give way, or vayningsplikt, is all about dynamic adjustment. It requires you to safely yield to intersecting traffic. You need to show clear intentions by braking smoothly and early, because coming to an abrupt stop right at the line just induces confusion and panic in other drivers. You slow down progressively, and here's the key. A complete stop isn't even legally required if the way is fully clear. On the other hand, the obligation to stop, stopplikt, matches the yielding framework, but introduces an absolute requirement for complete cessation. You must bring your vehicle to a total, absolute standstill. No exceptions.
And I've got to add a serious warning tone here regarding that obligation to stop because the stakes are incredibly high. Rolling stops or slow creeping maneuvers at a standard stop sign, those aren't just minor infractions in this system. They are serious legal violations that can result in the immediate suspension of your driver's license. You must halt completely right before the painted stop line for a few seconds. Oh, and pay attention to this strict queue protocol. If there's a line of vehicles at a stop sign, every single vehicle must halt individually at the stop line. Tailgating the car ahead of you directly across without making your own personal stop is strictly illegal.
Okay, Section 3. The priority to the right rule. This is Sweden's fundamental default rule.
Picture an unregulated intersection. This brilliantly illustrates the priority to the right rule, or högerregeln. Basically, you must yield to all traffic approaching from your right-hand side. So if you're approaching an intersection and another car is pulling up on your right, you have a strict obligation to give way. Because there are no explicit signs or signals governing the flow there, you just have to wait and let them pass first. It is the universal baseline of Swedish roads.
But wait, because here is where people get it wrong and honestly, it causes accidents. Let's bust a major misconception right now. A lot of drivers falsely believe that if someone is entering from a private road, they automatically have to yield to the public road. That is absolutely false. Unless there are explicit priority signs or exit conditions present, the priority to the right rule fully applies at junctions between private and public roads. If they're on your right, even if they're on a private road, you still have the obligation to yield. Crazy, right?
Which brings us to Section 4, the exit rule exceptions. Let's pivot to the scenarios that completely override the default rule we just learned.
Here are the main situations where the priority to the right rule gets explicitly canceled. You've got priority roads, where entering cars must give way. Functional signatures, like traffic lights or stop signs. Roundabouts, where entering vehicles yield to those already inside the circle. Acceleration lanes, where drivers merge with mutual consideration. Special actions, like when a vehicle is reversing or making a U-turn. And finally, one of the most critical structural rules in the entire book, the exit rule.
So what exactly is this exit rule, or utfartsregeln? Think of it as a spatial override.
It dictates that you hold a strict obligation to give way to all cross-traffic when emerging onto a road from specific environments. And here's the kicker. It applies regardless of whether vehicles are approaching from your left or your right. The priority to the right rule goes completely out the window here. Left, right, doesn't matter. You yield.
So what exactly triggers this exit rule? Well, it's basically everyday architectural thresholds. We're talking pulling out of a parking lot, a parking garage, or a defined parking space. It kicks in when you're emerging from a property threshold, a residential driveway, or a gas station. It also triggers when you leave a pedestrian zone, a home zone, or an off-road territory. And importantly, it applies anytime your vehicle has to cross a physically raised sidewalk, footpath, or bike lane. In literally all of these structural situations, your obligation to yield to everyone else is absolute.
Almost done. Section 5, Priority Roads and Special Rules. Let's talk about the ultimate boss of road types.
If you see this prominent yellow diamond sign labeled B4 in the manual, you are on a priority road, or Hooverled. This means all drivers entering your roadway from intersecting paths are legally obligated to yield to you. And you know what's brilliantly helpful about this system? The sign continuity. The priority road sign is systematically repeated after every single intersection just to reassure you of your priority status. You never have to guess. And that status remains actively in place until it's explicitly canceled by the B5 sign, which is just that same yellow diamond but struck through with black diagonal lines.
Next up, we have a supplementary operational rule called the turning rule. This exists to ensure safe merging, and it explicitly protects the most vulnerable road users. If you are making a left turn, you must yield to oncoming straight-moving vehicles before initiating the turn. You cannot cut them off. Furthermore, when joining a carriageway, you absolutely cannot cause any obstruction or hazard to vehicles, cyclists, or pedestrians who are already occupying or crossing the specific lane you're turning into.
And finally, I have to share this quirky little rule regarding public transit buses because it's just fascinating. Priority around buses depends entirely on the posted speed limit. It's a really simple, brilliant threshold. If the speed limit is 50 kilometers per hour or less and a bus in the far right lane puts on its left indicator to pull out from a stop, you must give way to the bus. But the second that speed limit climbs above 50 kilometers per hour, the obligation completely flips. At higher speeds, the bus driver bears the sole obligation to yield and has to wait for a safe gap in traffic. Literally, one number dictates the obligation for everyone.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer on Swedish priority rules. It's a beautifully structured system that minimizes ambiguity by replacing aggressive rights with defensive responsibilities. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Next time you approach an intersection on your daily commute, regardless of where you live, will you demand your right of way, or will you look at the road through the lens of fulfilling your shared obligations? Think about how that simple mindset shift could completely change the way you drive. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.